Hey, good morning. My name is Chad Melton, and I am the pastor of ministries here at Faith Bible Church. And over the past several weeks, we have been asking the question, how do we find a good rhythm with all of the things that life throws at us? We have a limited time, energy, and resources. And in those limitations, we have to figure out how to get everything else to sync together. And the challenge that I and many of you have in here is we have a lot of things. I have baseball games that I'm constantly going to. I have basketball games. I want to take my wife on a date. I have church. I have small group. I have time studying. All of these things in life are coming at us, and we're trying to figure out how do we get it in rhythm. And then on top of that, a lot of us have a 40 to 50 hour a week job that we're trying to do. And then throw in exercise and sleep, and it's enough to just make me tired thinking about what all I've got going on. And so how are we supposed to balance it all? What do we do? And usually in these times, what happens is sometimes it moves us into, we get anxious about it. Anxiety increases. Sometimes depression will set in. Addictions. And typically what we try to do is all of these categories in life, what we do, we focus one of them. So if we need our family, that's struggling. So whatever needs the most attention at the time, we'll move that into the center and we'll make everything else revolve around it. And we put that in the organizing principle role, and it's the thing that all of the other categories are now organized around. And we learned from Dr. Anderson a few weeks ago and Rick last week that when we try to move one of these other categories into the organizing principle, it won't work because they are limited. And eventually, we will be left tired. We will be left feeling unfulfilled, and we will be out of rhythm. And as Whitty and Lance suggested the first couple of weeks, we need an unlimited organizing principle to meet the demands of life. And that's what Jesus promised us when he said, seek his kingdom, and all these things will be added to you. And so today, we're going to wrap up our series and look at what happens when we focus everything around our work, our careers, our jobs. And I want to clarify, before we move on, what work means. I want to clarify what I'm talking about today. I'm not talking about just your career. It could be work that you're doing to help someone. It could be work that you're doing around your house or around the church, or you're serving at a school. I understand that many of you in here might not be working a job right now because you could be staying at home to focus on raising your kids. That is work. Or you might be retired from your day-to-day job, and you still have to figure out how to balance all of these things and bring it into rhythm. So when I refer to work today, it's all-encompassing, and we have to learn how to bring our work into rhythm with everything else. So about 17 years ago, I was an associate student pastor at a church in Midland, Texas, at First Baptist Church in Midland. And I learned that summer just how oblivious and how I miss big things in my life sometimes, especially when it came to females. And so that summer, we hired an intern, a girl intern, to work with our girls' ministry. We just called her intern. She didn't even have a name. We just called her intern. And so she came, and so she was working with our girls' ministry. And shortly after that, a few weeks went by, and there were conversations going on around me going about basketball. And they were going, the ball's been passed to his court. And I picked up the ball. I dropped the ball. And I'm like, man, she plays basketball, so I didn't really think anything about it. And so all these basketball conversations were going on. And I remember this was 2005 because I remember this particular summer, the Longhorns were playing in the College World Series, and I love baseball. And so I had one focus, that was to watch the College World Series. And this girl intern said, well, hey, can I come over and watch the game with you? I'm like, yeah, everybody's going to be watching this game, right? Doesn't everybody love college baseball? And so I just assumed that's what everybody did. And so this girl comes over and watches the baseball game with me. And then after the game, she goes home. And then the next day, there are more conversations about the ball being dropped. And I'm like, man, there's a lot of basketball talk going on around here. I don't even understand. And so then finally my boss, we were driving. I remember him pointing it out to me. He goes, are you ever going to ask her out on a date? And that came out of nowhere for me. I'm like, well, she's pretty cute. She obviously loves baseball. So, and she loves Jesus. And so I guess. And I like, do you think she would say yes? And he's like, what do you think all the basketball conversations? You've been dropping the ball? I was dropping the ball because I was focused on the baseball game. I was focused on the wrong thing. I was focused on my world and what was going on in it. I missed a lot of really important things going on around me. Now, I will tell you that luckily I did end up asking her out, and it worked out pretty well for me. We've been married for over 16 years now. So I finally did ask her out. And so, but the problem though, is I was focused on the wrong things. I was focused on my job, the baseball game, my world. And I was missing something so much bigger that was going on around me until someone pointed it out to me. And I think many of us are like that with our work. We are so focused on working to pay our mortgage or to perform that we miss the big picture of what it means to make Jesus the organizing principle with our work. And work is something that God created us to do. You know, before the fall, Adam and Eve had work to do. The Bible talks about in eternity that we're going to be serving. I believe we're going to have responsibility. I don't think we'll be sitting on a cloud playing a harp as many pictures portray. Because God created us to work. And I'm not exactly sure what we'll do, but I think that's how He designed us. We enjoy working. We take pride in what we do. But right now, unhappiness in jobs is at an all-time high. According to a Gallup poll in July, 60% of people reported being detached at work. 19% of people said they are miserable. 50% reported being stressed. 41% reported being worried. And I have a feeling that if we were to poll our congregation today, it wouldn't be much different. So many people have a wrong perspective about work. And typically there are two unhealthy views about work. It's either it's a curse and it's something that I have to do and I'm miserable doing it, or the other unhealthy view is it becomes our purpose and what all the other categories of life revolve around. And if you make work the organizing principle of your life, it becomes an idol that rivals God. But work is something that we need. It's foundational to who we are. We don't need money from work to survive. We actually need the work itself. It's one of the few things that we can take in large doses and significant doses, and we're not be harmed by it. Some of you are retired in here, and you're actually struggling because you don't know what to do with your time. You need something to do. People in nursing homes, they have lots of rest and time to rest, but they would love something to do if they could just physically do it. And so, if work is a part of who we are and something that God designed for us, then why are so many people unhappy and out of rhythm with their work? Why are so many marriages torn apart because of work? Why does work cause so much dysfunction or unhappiness? And I've talked with people just recently in our church that they're struggling to bring their work into rhythm. They're working 60 plus hours a week. And then when they get home, they're thinking about their work, so they're disengaged from their family. I've talked with other people that they don't see the significance in their work. And then they're just going through the motions. It's just a job. It's just something they do to pay the bills. These are things that people feel, but we still continue to put work in the center. And we try to force everything in rhythm. This area is notorious for working long hours, for long commutes, for the pressure, the traveling all the time. But as Jesus followers, we want to do it differently. So how do we start today to put our work in rhythm with the other categories of our life? So today we're going to be looking at a story in the Gospel of Luke that will teach us a few things about how to put our work in rhythm with the rest of our lives. And in Luke 10, we are introduced to two friends of Jesus named Mary and Martha. Now we know from other passages in the Bible, they also have a brother named Lazarus. And so these friends of Jesus are found in a few stories throughout the gospel, and we can learn a few things about their lives and about who they are. First of all, they seem to live in Martha's house, as we'll see today in our story. They live in a town called Bethany, which is just right outside of Jerusalem, about 2 miles outside of Jerusalem. And so this makes sense with Luke's timeline, because in Luke 9:51, we see that Jesus is heading to Jerusalem. And he's heading there to die. He says in 9:51, he set his face toward Jerusalem. So Jesus knew what was coming. And the Gospel of Luke actually focuses most of his gospel on the last 3 or 4 months of Jesus' life. And this is important to understand the context of what's happening in our story today. We need to understand that Jesus is heading to Jerusalem to give his life and be executed on the cross. So we'll pick up at the end of Luke 10 and verse 38. This is 38. So now as they went on their way, Jesus entered a village, and a woman named Martha welcomed him into her house. And she had a sister called Mary who sat at the Lord's feet and listened to his teaching. But Martha was distracted with much serving. So let's just pause there. So if you have siblings or kids, you can already feel the tension starting to rise. And we don't know exactly who they, as I said at the verse of 38, that they were heading or that they went on their way. But we can see from a few verses before in verse 21 that the disciples were with him. And so there's a good chance that you have Jesus and the 12 disciples, and then you got Mary and Martha, and there's a good chance that Lazarus is there because he lives with them. So there's probably 16 adults that are a part of the story. And so when they get, it says Martha welcomed them into her house. And so we have 16 adults that she's welcoming in. And so now preparations have to be made. And in those times in the first century, it was very common that when you welcome somebody into your house, you wash their feet. And so these 13 men, she's probably washing their feet as she welcomes them into her house. It was very common, as you're going to welcome somebody into your house, that you prepare a meal for them. And so think about this. 16 adults are coming to her house, and she has to do all this. All these things were normal in that culture. So she's preparing a meal. That's a big deal in today's time, much less in the first century when you can't run down to the grocery store and buy groceries. That's a lot of people. Imagine if you were going home right after church and you were serving 16 people. That's a lot of work. That's a lot of preparation. And if you're married, it's probably a team effort. You're expecting everybody in the family to pitch in. If it's right after church, you're probably not even going to be here because you're going to be at home. That's a big deal. That's hard. That's a big event. And we see in verse 40, it says that Martha is distracted with much serving. And the Greek word here for much, it means great in quantity, degree, or extravagant, or extent. So it seems that she wanted to go out of her way to make these guests feel welcome. Paper plates weren't going to do for this group. They were special. She's breaking out the fine china. It's probably not finger food and sandwiches. It's a meal. So Martha wanted to take care of her guests because she loved Jesus. So she probably fixed an extravagant meal. She wanted to make sure they were well taken care of. So 16 people are at Martha's house, and she is serving all of these guests in an extravagant way. And where is Mary? Her sister. Mary is sitting with Jesus, listening to him while Martha is busy working. Now, one of the things I love about the stories in the Bible is it gives me hope about what happens in my house. And I'm actually glad to see that my house is no different than in the first century. And I guess this stands the test of time. When one person in the family is perceived to not be pulling their weight, it causes tension. It does in my home too. I have 3 kids, and if the 2 older ones are emptying the dishwasher and the youngest, who is 6, is not helping, they will notice. And whenever it comes to not helping, there ain't no grace in my house with my kids. And so maybe your house is different, but at least in my house and Martha's house, this causes tension. And the tension is rising. And let me tell you, Martha's house right now is out of rhythm at this moment. So let's see what happened. So we're going to go back, pick up verse 39. And she had a sister called Mary, who sat at the Lord's feet and listened to his teaching. But Martha was distracted with much serving. And she went up to him and said, Lord, do you not care that my sister has left me to serve alone? Tell her then to help me. Like, wow. Man, first of all, Martha just seems to have a strong personality. She does not have a problem speaking her mind. Let me just tell you. We see this in other passages. In John 11, her brother was sick and died. And she confronts Jesus and she says, if you had only been here sooner, he would be okay. And then after he died, Jesus is about to raise him from the dead. He says, roll the stone away. And she goes, hey, Jesus, it might stink a little bit. You might not want to do that. And then in John 12, we see Martha once again serving. So the Gospels give us a little insight to her personality. She's a hard worker. She gets things done. And she doesn't have a problem with speaking her mind. Martha is a servant. And I love that about her. And I'm guessing Jesus did too. So Martha walks up to Jesus and she calls him Lord. So she obviously has an understanding about who he is. She calls him Lord. And then she proceeds to tell Jesus what to do. She pulls the passive-aggressive question out. Don't you care, talking to Jesus? Don't you care that Mary has left me to do all this by myself? Tell her to get off the ground and help. And there's a reversal here. Martha is now telling Jesus, the King of Kings and Lord of Lords, she's telling him what to do. Imagine the disciples in the room. Imagine the tension in the room. And I'd love to see the disciples. I love the disciples. Man, they're so much fun. What do you think they're doing in this moment? I can just imagine, I don't know how big the room is, but I can imagine them all being there. And they see Martha go up to Jesus and say, hey, go tell her what to do, Jesus. Get off the ground. And I can just see Peter, just duck his head, nobody make eye contact. Just don't look. John, stop looking. Just don't make eye contact. Because they're sitting there thinking, oh man, I've seen him control the weather with his words. I've seen him cast out demons. What in the world is he going to do to Martha? I can just feel this story. And it seems that Martha is angry. She is working her tail off, trying to do a good thing to serve these men and these guests at her house. And her sister is not helping at all. And now Martha confronts Jesus and tells him how to handle the situation because she knows best. Verse 41, but the Lord answered her, Martha, Martha. And I love his response. There seems to be a gentleness about it. He probably knows she's a little worked up. He knows that she's a little angry. I can even see him maybe just smiling a little bit and actually laughing a little bit, going, "Oh, Martha, Martha." He says, "You are anxious and troubled about many things, but there is one thing that is necessary. Mary has chosen the good portion, which will not be taken away from her." He doesn't reprimand her. He just says, "I can see that you're upset. You are out of rhythm. You are anxious. You're troubled about many things. You're busy doing all of these things, but actually there's one thing that is necessary." And he doesn't tell her she's wrong in what she's doing because what she's doing wasn't wrong. Serving these people in her house is a good thing. Working hard is a good thing. She was just out of rhythm because the work became the organizing principle in her life. And I also think it's interesting, he doesn't tell her exactly what the one thing is. All he says is, Mary has chosen the good portion, which will not be taken away from her. So the one thing that is necessary seems to be what Mary is doing at that time. She is sitting with Jesus. Mary had made Jesus the organizing principle of her life. And this shows Mary's devotion to Jesus. Her worship, her focus was on what was most important. She had Jesus at the center. And at this moment, everything else was in rhythm. Martha could not see the bigger picture of what was happening at her house because she was focused on the wrong thing. She's a hard worker. She's bold. She gets things done. And I believe Martha wanted to make her guests feel welcome, but in her passion, she made serving the most important thing, and she missed Jesus in it. And when anything other than Jesus is in the middle, eventually things will be knocked out of rhythm. So what would it have looked like if Martha would have had her work in rhythm? Remember from Luke 9, Jesus was heading to the cross. He had his face set toward Jerusalem. He knew what was coming. I imagine there's a heaviness with Jesus. I can't imagine that when he got there that he wanted this extravagant meal. I have a feeling that maybe he just wanted to sit with his friends. Right after this, we see is where he teaches the disciples to pray. What would it have looked like if Martha would have had, if she would have been in rhythm? Maybe she welcomes them into her house and she kneels down and she washes their feet. Then after that, Martha and the disciples and Mary, they sit and listen to Jesus. They spend time with him. Maybe they pray together. And then after that, how cool it would be if the scripture said, and then Martha got up and served them a meal. But that's not what the story says. We don't see that. We have a story about a wonderful, hardworking woman that loved Jesus, that loved serving, but she had her work out of rhythm. And Jesus said, "You missed the most important thing, which was me. Martha, you are distracted and anxious." And many of you here this morning are feeling distracted and anxious. And you will only find rhythm in your life when you follow Jesus. To seek the kingdom in your work is to follow Jesus. You organize the categories of your life around that. You make every decision based on whether or not it allows you to continue to follow him. It's how I'm spending my time. Does that reflect Jesus at work? Am I honoring my boss? Am I honoring my organization? Does how I'm spending my time honor my family? Does this career move, does it detract from following Jesus? Am I following Jesus in how I'm teaching and raising my kids? Now that I'm retired, am I serving God with my time, energy, and resources? When our work is seen through the lens of following Jesus, it changes everything. Your work is no longer just about paying bills and paying a mortgage. It's not just something you do from 8 to 5. It's not something you did a few years ago, and now it's time to just relax. You start to realize that you are a part of something much bigger than yourself. When you see work through the lens of following Jesus, you see your work as a way that you serve those closest to you. This is a good thing. And I hope you understand that when you're able to provide a home, a safe place for your kids, to have material things, those are not bad things when they're done in rhythm. You should be proud if you're working there to provide for your family, no matter what your occupation is. You should be proud as a stay-at-home mom or dad that you are helping your family. If you're single, you serve your family now, your friends. Your work is a way to serve those closest to you. But also, when you see through the lens of a Jesus follower, your work becomes a way to serve those around us and to give our lives away for the benefit of others, which is what we see Jesus do. Once again, you're a part of something much bigger than yourself. You find value in serving other people and helping others because that's what Jesus was about. No matter what field you're in. If you're in the oil field, you work at a bigger organization probably. You work with other people, and how you work with them matters to them. You're helping people put gas in their cars to go to work. You're a part of something bigger. If you're a doctor, you're helping take care of people in a time of crisis a lot of times. If you're a fitness instructor, you're helping people stay healthy. If you're an engineer, you're helping make things a little better so people can function better. We're all a part of something much bigger when we start to see what we do, our work, through the lens of following Jesus. We're part of something bigger, and you might be at that job for the person sitting next to you. And when we see our work through the lens of following Jesus, we see work as a way to serve God. When you seek first the kingdom through your work, you start to understand more about your distinct abilities and how you can serve God in more specific ways. Maybe you're really good at handling details. There's probably things you can do outside of your career to serve God with those talents. I know last Saturday, some of you came up on a work day and used your talents and your skills to help with our church. Built a fence. Some of our deacons power washed our building. So there are ways to serve outside of that. We have several men in the church that are retired, but they love woodworking. If you got coffee this morning, the coffee bar that all the coffee is on was built by these men a couple of years ago. If you walk out down the hallway down here, you'll see a beautiful table right by the missions wall that these men built. There's another one very similar to upstairs. They're retired now. They're just saying, hey, what can I do with my skills? I want to serve God. I want to serve the church with what I have to offer. Many of you serve every Sunday morning using your talents and your time. This is just a snapshot of having a kingdom focus about your work. So when you make Jesus the organizing principle of your work, it becomes selfless. It's not about you. And this is the way Jesus lived. He submitted to the will of his Father. He served those he loved. He was an example to those that followed him. He knew his work on the cross was a part of something much bigger. And this is what Jesus meant to seek first the kingdom. In Tim Keller's book called Every Good Endeavor, which is about connecting our work to God's work, Keller tells a story about J.R.R. Tolkien, who wrote The Lord of the Rings. And so at one point, Tolkien was struggling finishing up this incredible story. And at one point during his struggle, Tolkien wrote a short story to a local newspaper called The Leaf by Nigel. So this is a story that Tolkien wrote. And what it's about, this story, The Leaf by Nigel, is about a painter, which actually represented Tolkien himself at this time in his life. So in this short story, The Leaf by Nigel, it's about a painter. And this painter, he had one picture in mind to paint. And this would be his life's work. It was a picture of a leaf, which was a part of a big tree that led into this beautiful forest at the foothills of a snow-capped mountains behind it. So picture this. In this story, that's what this painter was painting. And Nigel had laid out a canvas so large to paint this painting that he needed a ladder to get to the top of it. So in this story, Nigel also knew that at the end of his life, he would need to take a journey, which was death. In this story, he knew he would have to die. But Nigel did not want to die because he wanted to get this one picture done. So Nigel started painting this beautiful picture, but he never got much done. Because Nigel was the kind of guy who was really good at painting a leaf. And he would focus on the minute details, getting the color just right, the shading just right, the shape just right. So he got distracted by some of the small things. But also Nigel, he was always being distracted by serving others. He was always helping other people. So not much ever got put on this canvas. And especially his neighbor, Parrish, who was always coming to ask for help. And Nigel was always helping him. And so Nigel knew that his time was coming to an end, that he was supposed to die. And then one day he was helping Parrish, his neighbor, take care of his sick wife. And while helping, Nigel got sick. And then the driver showed up to take him on his journey, which was death. He had died. And Nigel did not want to go because he had not finished the painting. But Nigel had died from the sickness. And after death, in this story that Tolkien wrote, after death, Nigel gets on a train toward the mountains of the heavenly afterlife. And when he gets to the outskirts of the countryside, something catches his eye. And he runs to it. And there it is, before him stood a tree. It was his tree. It was finished. You could see the leaves blooming, the branches growing. And he gazed at the tree and he opened his arms wide and he said, "It's a gift." See, the world before Nigel had pretty much forgotten him completely. His work on this earth ended unfinished and helpful to only a few. But in this new country, the permanently real world, he finds that his tree, in full detail and finished, would be enjoyed forever. So we can all relate to Nigel, that we all have things that we want to accomplish, but might not ever achieve what we set out to do. When we place Jesus in the central role, we still have the same time, energy, and resources, but we realize what we are working for might not all be experienced right now, because life isn't just about now. When we seek God's kingdom in this life, in these categories, it doesn't only bring rhythm now, but also the full impact of these categories are discovered in eternity. When you trust Jesus in this life, your job, your hobbies, your work are seen with an eternal perspective. And everything we do can matter forever. So today, I want you to view your work through the lens of following Jesus. How does that affect your attitude with your coworkers or your boss or those that you oversee? When you view through the lens of following Jesus, how does that affect the amount of hours you're working? How does that affect why you're going to work every day? How does it affect your attitude when you're at home with your kids? When what you do now matters then in eternity, you will find that rhythm you're after in the day-to-day. 1 Corinthians 15:58 says this, "In the Lord your labor is not in vain." Some of you here this morning you're feeling out of rhythm. Maybe you're feeling like Martha. You're anxious and you're distracted. Jesus is telling you to put him at the center. He is the only unlimited thing that can put all the other categories into rhythm. If you're feeling anxious and distracted, put him at the center. And what would it look like? Imagine if we as a church, if we went to work, if we lived our lives through the lens, through the perspective as Jesus followers. How would that change things? How would that affect your work? How would it affect your families, your time, your resources? And I think people in this world would take notice. And they would want to make Jesus the center of their lives too by watching you.